Hello and welcome to the Beginning of Wisdom Live. I'm Andrew Schumacher and let's try this again. My stream was just not working right, so I had to stop it and start it again, and so probably lost some people, but I'm going to go ahead and get going and kind of go over what my big announcement is, as well as the teaching tonight on Hebrews. So sorry about the craziness. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Can you see me now? I see some activity in the chat. You guys found the new stream. Are you seeing me all right? Because I'm still seeing the in my preview the intro window before the stream starts. Can you see my face? Because you ought to be able to see my face right now. Let me know if you can hear me. Everything looks good. Thank you. Random teaching answer is yes. Okay, good. So I'm trusting that, and we will be moving forward. So, big announcement. What is the big announcement? It has to do with what you're seeing on screen right now, all the stuff about Kick. So if you were here for the first time that failed, I will you'll hear this again. But basically, I've been watching what's going on a little bit in the streaming space and apologetics and everything that's been happening. And I've noticed that there are huge audiences of people, highly interactive audiences that are watching all kinds of stuff. And it's not just all video games and stuff, but watching stuff on Twitch and Kick and catching these live streams. And the thing is, it's very, very interactive. And I realize there's a huge ministry opportunity here because they do not have really anything going on. There's not really anything streaming there. And if you're wondering, if you're trying to do what I told you to do in all the graphics, go over there and follow me. The reason the show was late tonight is that for some reason, it's not streaming to Kick. My system is just not doing it. So I'm not sure how I'm going to rectify that. I'll kind of go over some details of the announcement, and then that'll give you an idea of what I might do. But basically, there's just a huge opportunity to reach the lost there, and something that we just don't have. That YouTube is absolutely full of Christian apologetics. Christian apologetics live streams specifically. It's all over the place. There is no shortage of that. So basically what I saw is that there is just nothing going on over there. And so I thought, gosh, and yeah, I see Random here saying Discord big. Yeah, and that's probably something down the road that I'll probably look into as well. But looking at the landscape, I just thought, gosh, there's just a huge opportunity here is number one. But there's a couple other things that I thought about. The fact is that just culturally speaking, more and more people these days are looking into Christianity, looking into the Bible, and wanting to know more about it. And that includes everyone. That includes people over there who are watching these live streams, and they're probably watching YouTube videos as well, I'm sure. But the fact is that there's a real opportunity to just interact, and that's a huge thing. Now, another reason, as far as and I'll get kind of into that and what I plan for it to look like, but another kind of opportunity that I saw there is a chance to take what I'm doing here in a slightly different direction in terms of what kind of content I'm doing. If you saw my most recent video reacting to Lex Meyer on his question about if Jesus broke the Sabbath, you'll kind of see a little snippet of what I'm talking about, where things are a little more off the cuff and interactive, and especially if there's an audience that's chatting and all that kind of stuff, that so much the better. One of the things that makes a platform like Kick different from YouTube, especially when it comes to that, is that the chat, the people watching it, it's only about a 1 to 2 second lag between when I say something and when you hear it over on Kick. And so if you hear me say something and you chat back, it's virtually real time. Whereas here on YouTube, it's more like 14, 15, 20 seconds of lag between when I say something and then you hear it and then can respond to it in the chat. And then I think your chats come through pretty much right away. That's what I've seen is, you know, when I put a chat in, you know, and I'm listening, you know, someone, they respond pretty quick. But again, I mean, it takes a while, you know, anyway, it's that lag creates a disconnect in terms of that interaction. And that's something that's not happening over there. That it is a different, it creates a whole different atmosphere. So I'm pretty excited about that. But what it also does is it gives me the opportunity to to try out some different content types that are a little less formal and a little more entertaining. And also when it comes to, you know, financial support, it's a little more geared toward making that easier than what we have on YouTube. You know, I really have never really asked for super chats or donations or things like that. And a big reason for that is that, well, one big reason has been up to this point that I've been unable to be consistent in terms of what I'm creating. And so that's been part of it. I don't want to ask for money when I'm not really like just creating consistent content and that kind of thing. But the other issue is that on YouTube, when you do a super chat, YouTube takes 30%. And, you know, as much as I love Google as a company, tongue in cheek, you know, I just didn't want to, you know, I didn't, people do it and it's fine and people feel good about doing it. That's cool. But the thing is, over on Kick, when someone gives, you know, a donation or they subscribe, which is a different thing over there. Over there, you can be a follower, and when you follow, it's just like, you know, that's like subscribing on YouTube. It's free. It just means you get notified when people go live. But if you subscribe, which I don't even have access to yet, I have to stream there for a while, enough to actually build it up. There's goals and all this. But once you can do subscriptions, which are a paid thing, and they're like $5 a month or something, and it makes you not get ads and all that. There's some benefits to doing that. But the issue, what, you know, that does create, the split is 95% to 5%, you know, where Kick keeps 5%, and it's really it's the processing fees, you know, that kind of thing. So it's a much better split there, and I just think, you know, there's an opportunity there where if I can create some value that's really actually fun and people are enjoying it, you know, then you know, so much the better. Yeah, and I see some stuff from Lunar Blue there. Yeah, being consistent streamers as a full-time job, it's hard. I imagine it is. I mean, it's hard. I have a full-time job, and my full-time job is hard. Kick is like YouTube, but a little more like Twitch. Yeah, it's a lot like Twitch. It's from what I've seen. I've never been much of a viewer of Twitch. I mean, most of what's going on there is people either playing video games or chatting with their audience. That's about 99% of it right there. And you know, the people just chatting with their audience, they're chatting about whatever is interesting to them. But you know, you see there's been the growth of other types of content here on YouTube that I think I could bring over there and really, you know, where people don't know about it and might like it. Things like debate streams, where not only, you know, having like hosting a debate or planning something, which is cool and probably do that, but also like the type where you have people call in or come in on stream with you and you know, that kind of thing. I've seen Marlon Wilson do a number of those. Oh, hey, look at that. So thank you, Ryan. So that's something. What you just saw there is Ryan Milne went over to Kick and he followed me, and it created a little alert boop, up on the screen. That's kind of fun. So so that's another thing is just when you do stuff, there it is. And it's much more interactive. Now, I really wish my stream was working over there and that this was actually playing on Kick right now. But it just isn't doing it. So here's kind of at any rate what I want to do with it, or what I want it to look like, at least initially. I've mentioned a few different types of content, like reaction stuff where I'm dealing more off the cuff with different types of content, but also debates, having people on stream with me, getting into some conversations that way. There's a number of things that I'm really excited for. RB Studios, yes, Kick is an app on your phone. You can download it. It's spelled Kick. There's other apps that aren't it, but it's green. You see a green K. Oh, got another person following. So I didn't catch that one in time. So yeah, that's one thing. It's pretty fun. You can, and I plan on doing a lot of things where people can do stuff that actually affects the stream real time, that I'm not controlling necessarily, that I just set up to go automatically. So it's just a different animal. So I'm excited for that. And so yeah, on the one hand, I do want to do different kinds of content, but also and really like interact and react, not just with theological videos. Yes, I know it's you, Haps. I know who you are, RB Studio. I'm just calling you by what you are in chat. So you can, oh, I see what you said. It's me. You're the one that just followed. So thank you. I appreciate it. That stuff matters. It's part of getting up in the, there's a criteria that they use for different types of like monetization and stuff, and it matters how many followers you have and all that. But I plan on also expanding what I talk about. I've talked a lot, as you know, if you've been following the channel, about the Torah Observance movements and things like that. That's not going anywhere necessarily, but I plan on doing more. Those live streams, one thing I haven't mentioned is those live streams are typically very long. They just, I mean, someone will sit down and play a video game for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours straight. And they might sit and chat for just as long. And my goal to start is to sit down in the evening like this and go for, 3, 4 hours and do it a couple times a week. So that's kind of that's the big thing that I may be biting off more than I can chew. We'll see if that's what works out. But that much time gives me time to do a lot of things. One of the other types of content that I might do, depending on how well how good of interactions we're having, especially with unbelievers or people, not just unbelievers, but people who have questions. They're encountering some sort of challenge to the faith, and they're looking for answers. A lot of times people ask me a question, I don't have the answer, and I go look it up. And on a long stream like that, it's pretty normal to have, take breaks. Though people will got to go to the bathroom. I mean, if you're on stream that long, you got to sometimes get up and do things. But sometimes what I might end up doing a lot is if somebody asks me a question I don't know the answer, we got time. Let me look it up, and I'll put my browser on the screen, and we'll go dig. We'll go find out the answer together, and that kind of a thing. I won't feel as pressed for time as far as as that goes. Lunar Blue, just have a schedule, stick with it. That will go a long way, and that's my plan. So tonight, Monday, today is day 1, and I'm planning on going live Mondays and Thursdays at the same time at 8 p.m. Central. And what it will look like is in terms of deeply researched content, I think I can produce, a show a week like I've done in the past. And so my plan is that it'll alternate. Tonight, once I get done talking to you about this stuff with the announcement, we're going to dive into Hebrews 10 and go just finish up that chapter and continue with the Hebrews series. And that's something I plan on doing once a week. But then on the other day, on the Thursday, it'll be kind of it'll be all Q&A / reactions and things like that. So I'll do that kind of more broad content. And the plan is to start out like I am right now on YouTube, and the plan is to do on both. It's not working out right now. But to start out on YouTube and do the main prepared teaching or stuff that I'm working on. Yay Hebrews, yes, that's my lovely wife Nikki. Yes, I love Hebrews so much. I've been working on it in this in this series for a number of years now, but that's just because of time. But yeah, the idea is I want to be able to still provide that and do that on both YouTube and Kick. But then once that's done and we're kind of wrapped up with any questions related to that teaching content, to then shut down the YouTube stream and just continue on Kick and have it be, exclusively there for the other reaction stuff. And then probably on Thursdays, since that, or whatever day of the week, this is all kind of fluid at the moment, but whatever day of the week doesn't have a real good prepared teaching, it's all going to be, probably reacting to something and then, or, something a little more off the cuff from the start, but still give it about an hour and a half on both YouTube and Kick, and then shut down YouTube and go and finish up on Kick and go for a number of hours past that point. That's kind of what I'm planning on, and I'm really excited about it. I'm excited and terrified because it's going to be, I remember when I was doing a live show every week, that was a lot of preparation. So on Kick, if you go to kick.com/beginningwisdom, that's the channel. It doesn't work the same as YouTube, where, YouTube, you schedule a specific live stream like this one and you can see it in the scroll. On there, it's just when you're live, and when you're not, you're not. And right now it says I'm offline, even though I'm trying to stream there. But if you go to that channel, kick.com/beginningwisdom, you'll find me and you can follow, even if I'm not, live at the moment. What I'm probably going to do tonight is I'm going to try, I may have to reconfigure my software, but I'm going to try to get, when we're done here and we shut this one down, is to just start it up over there. So if you want to join me, just hang out there for a few minutes and hopefully I'll get it going. If it doesn't, the one thing that's interesting about the chat over there, on Kick, is you can, like, my channel, the chat's not specific to a particular live stream like it is on here on YouTube. There's a channel chat, so to speak. You can go in and type something in the chat, and I'll see it there. There in Kick. Now, I may not get a notification or something if I'm not there, but if I have it open and I'm working on it, and you type something in the chat, it just pops up. It's distinct from the actual live stream itself. It's a little different. It's just right on the channel, right on the page there. So you can chat with me even there. Do we have to use real names? No, you can use your same, you can sign up there the way you sign up, on YouTube or anywhere else. I mean, my channel's Beginning Wisdom. I don't have anything with my name, Andrew Schumacher, on, other than the fact that I choose to use my real name on stuff. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna try to do. It may fail me if it's not connecting now. It may fail to connect going forward as well. We'll see what it does. I'm not sure why it's not working. It worked last time I was live. If you look at that channel, you'll see that there's something from a while ago that did work. So I don't know why it's not working tonight. It is what it is. But that's what I'm going to try to do. If it fails completely, then it fails completely. But and we'll try again on Thursday. But that's the announcement. That's the big thing, is I'm going to be just trying to make a dent in that world a little bit, and it's kind of like, the way I see it, it's kind of like when I was in college, there was a guy who stood on a bench in the quad at my college. There was a spot where everybody pretty much walked by all the time to go from one building to another to get to classes and stuff. And he would, like, be just standing up there once a week. It was always on the same day, so you always knew when he was going to be there. And he would give, gospel presentation, but he wasn't just there to yell at people. He was actually very friendly. It was a very friendly, open air, kind of preaching. He wasn't there to yell at anybody. He was just there to say, hey, you need to repent and give your life to Jesus, because you're a sinner and all that stuff. I mean, he was very clear about the gospel, but he was also there to answer questions. He's like, he would constantly ask, does anybody have questions about the Bible or Jesus or anything? And people, lots of people did. Lots and lots and lots of people did. And the vast majority of his time would actually be spent addressing those questions. And you've probably seen lots of videos like this online of people at college campuses. I mean, famously, Charlie Kirk that's exactly what he was doing. He was kind of doing it in a, political / religious, but people asked lots of biblical questions, and he would talk about those kinds of things. But there are lots of other folks like, the names escape me, but I've seen them. There's a number of other guys that, Christian, theologians, evangelists that go to campuses and talk to people like that. So that's kind of how I see things a little bit with Kick, is that it's able to be much more interactive, much, like I said, that lag time isn't there, so we can just converse. And I have the ability to, if it works, if the technology works, like I can do here, I can throw a link in the chat and I can bring someone up on camera and just talk to them, in real time if they want to do that. A lot of people on YouTube will do whole panels and things like that, but I don't have the desire to create that kind of chaos personally. So anyway, what I'm going to do is that's kind of it for the announcement, that if that makes sense. So when we're done here, what you can do is, give me a few minutes, just open up Kick on your browser and on my channel, or if you're on your phone, you can get the app, or you can do it in a browser on the phone, I'm sure, as well, but I'm sure the app is a little easier. Just look me up, Beginning Wisdom, as it says there on the screen, and just have it open. And if you follow, you can get notifications too. I follow like a couple guys, not very much, but and we can and hopefully it'll work. And if you do go there and follow me, number one, that does help me with achieving different criteria I need to move ahead on that platform. So that is a big help for me. But also that way you can get notifications, and it's not like YouTube where things are like, maybe you'll get the notification, maybe you won't. I've used it a bit, and it's very consistent. It does, and you don't have to do anything special about ringing a bell or be fancy like that. You just hit follow, and when that person goes live, you'll get a ding on your phone that says they're live right now. And so if you follow, then you don't have to hang out. And if I do get going tonight, you'll see a ding, and if you want to join, you can. So that's kind of how that works. All right. So been going now for we had a lot of difficulties, so been going about a half an hour, but we're an hour past start time. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the teaching tonight on Hebrews. So let me go ahead and pull that up, and we will kind of get that rolling. And I'm excited about this too. This is some good stuff. We are in the second half of chapter 10 of Hebrews, and this is part 9 of the series where we've been addressing Hebrews versus the Torah Observance movements. And so bear with me a moment while I pull this stuff up. I'm going to put it where it's viewable. And then, let's see, pull that back down here. All right. Beautiful. Okay, that looks nice. And then let's make sure it is. All right, let's go ahead and go there. And that is not it. Well, that's kind of it, but it's not quite right. Let me get the right one here. Slides, keynote. The other one. That's the one. All right. Okay. Looking good. All right. So, Hebrews 10, 19 through 39. Let's jump in here. So this is we'll kind of recap a little bit here as we go. So this is, like I said, this is part 9. This is the point in Hebrews. If you're familiar with a lot of Paul's epistles, this is structured in a similar way, where there's a whole lot of theology up front at the beginning, and then we move to application. This is the section where the author of Hebrews transfers into some application. Now, it doesn't mean their theology is over, because as we'll see, there's still a lot of it, but it's giving us the the move into what we should now do as a result of everything we've read. And of course, and the main thrust in this section is to point to faith and love and obedience regarding our hearts and motives. That's kind of the main thing. So let's go ahead and read the text, and we'll get going. Starting in verse 19 of Hebrews 10. Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment, and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. Anyone who has set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and has profaned the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified and has outraged the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. But recall the former days when, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Therefore do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. For yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. All right. So that's the section. So let's start by looking here at first couple of verses here, 19 and 20. There's a lot. We're going to spend a lot of time just kind of looking at this stuff, especially as we consider other takes, from the Torah Observance movements. And we're going to look again at Tim Hegg's commentary and what he says about these things. So, first of all, notice here it says therefore, and as the saying goes, when you see therefore, ask what it's there for. What did the prior section talk about? Verse 14 says, "By one sacrifice he has perfected forever those who are being made holy." Verse 18 says, "Where there is forgiveness of these, that is of sins, there is no longer any sacrifice for sin." These are the things, that's the verse right before this one. So therefore, because of these, and because of these, since these give us the confidence to enter the holy places, and that's what it's going to move on to say. So, and as you see in this verse 19 and 20, it actually hasn't got to what therefore what yet. It says, "Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by a new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is through this flesh, by the sacrifice of himself," and the reason there's no other sacrifices, all that stuff that it said in the prior section, this is just basically reiterating that, but it's putting it in new language. So based on the sacrifice, we have complete forgiveness. Since we have this confidence, we no longer need to depend on the repeated animal sacrifices. Notice we have confidence. We do not have the reminder of sins. 10:3 talked about the first covenant and its sacrifices were a reminder of sins. That's not what we have. We have confidence, which is very different. And now, because of this, because we enter through the new and living way, through the curtain of Christ himself, that's referred to here as a new and living way. It's not what came before. This is a new thing. There's lots in the Torah movements that want to say it's not new. They don't like new, and we'll see that when we look at Hegg's commentary. All right, notice how everything about the prior covenant system is being replaced by the true thing they pointed to, right? So it's a new and living way. It's the flesh of Christ and his sacrifice, not the animal sacrifices, by which we have this confidence. There's no hint here of coexistence. If you caught some of the previous, especially as we were talking about chapter 9, Tim Hegg and the people who follow his theology, their take on the animal sacrifices is that in order to preserve their system, they can't really say the sacrifices are no longer operating as they once were, because if you admit that, you basically have given away the farm when it comes to Torah observance theology. You cut the main argument for it out from under it, because then you're admitting that things have changed. The law doesn't apply the same today as it did for Israel under that covenant. If you admit that, now you have to argue specifically for what you think continues, since you don't think sacrifices continue. Well, Hegg doesn't do this. Hegg and the people that follow him say, no, it all continues in some way. And so what they have to do is figure out a way for it to continue. And so he teaches coexistence between the two systems. He teaches that the sacrifices of the temple, they don't take away sins, they just make you ceremonially clean so that you can do work in the temple, which is the sacrifices themselves. He fixates on the language of atonement and cleansing of the temple, and that atonement is a ritual cleansing, and ignores the forgiveness of sins aspect of atonement. In order to say that these two things can coexist, because if the animal sacrifices don't at all deal with sin and forgiveness and that stuff, then they can be over here on one side, while Jesus' death that does deal with sin is over here on the other side. But of course, the text doesn't give us that. The text doesn't say there's a new and living way that now comes alongside the old way that continues. No, rather, there's just the new and living way. That's the only thing we're presented with here. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So what is this new way? The new covenant, it's indeed new. The sacrifice that brings about our perfection is a new and living way. It hasn't existed before. So this always brings up the question, well, the saints of the Old Testament, people like Abraham, were they not saved by faith? And they were. But the new covenant isn't faith. We become members of the new covenant by faith, but the new covenant is new. And the old covenant saints, or even prior to what we call the old covenant, the Sinai covenant, like Abraham, it says Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. Yes, he did, receive salvation through faith the same way we do. But just because the method is the same doesn't mean every reality is exactly the same. Now, the basis of it is the same, but it's from a different perspective, right? So it is based on the sacrifice of Christ. There's no other means to deal with sin. So yes, Abraham was declared righteous, but he wasn't just declared righteous solely based on faith. I mean, from his perspective, it was solely based on faith. It wasn't based on his good works or anything like that. But just like for us, what actually took care of the sin was Christ. But yeah, jumping here, I'm seeing the chat. Redeem Worker, are you a Michael Heiser fan? Your teaching is deep enough that it reminds me of him. Well, thank you. I like Michael Heiser. I don't agree with everything that he says. I used to, if you watch some of my older videos, I used to be, more, when I first kind of discovered him, I was more into his stuff than I would say I am now. And it's not that there's a lot of stuff I think he's wrong about, but there's a lot of stuff that he brings out that I think is very good. And one thing I really love about his work that I just do naturally in what I do is the idea of biblical theology, of just kind of tracing ideas through the text. Don't try to impose a systematic theology right on the text. I think systematic theology is good, but when we're dealing with the Bible, we should deal with the Bible as the primary thing and not just try to say, oh, this is, XYZ systematic, concept insert here in this text. I mean, it may be connected, but I don't know if it's always a good idea. So yeah, that's kind of my thing. So yeah, so and that's kind of what I see here is that Abraham, yes, it was by faith, but who took away Abraham's sin? Obviously, no sacrifices took away his sin, because they can't do that. It was the sacrifice of Christ applied to Abraham. And so some will try to argue, well, see, so the new covenant's not really that new, but it's being applied to him retroactively. But there's some other texts we could look at that really, I would say, point to the fact that they weren't fully redeemed in actuality and in their lives until the sacrifice of Christ. This gets into personal eschatology, what happens when you die, things like that. When Jesus gives the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and Lazarus is in what's called Abraham's bosom, the rich man is they're both appear to be in what the Old Testament calls Sheol, the grave, the underworld. That this kind of is how it's described. But it seems that there's a good part of Sheol and a bad part of Sheol in the Old Testament. We don't see people go to heaven, but they don't go to heaven when they die. Elijah's caught up to heaven. Enoch, it just says he wasn't anymore. God took him. Maybe he went to heaven, but the chariots of fire came and get Elijah, and they seem to carry him upward. So maybe he, who knows? But but when people died, they all speak of going to the grave, right? They go down, and Jesus gives us a glimpse of that, I believe, in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And that there's this good part, and that there's some communication. So the good part and the bad part, the rich man speaks to Lazarus, and that's weird. But then in when you look at something written from the perspective after Jesus has died on the cross and been resurrected and ascended to his throne, now you see saints in heaven. You look at Revelation, and the martyrs that John sees, and he does see people, the multitudes, and he seems to be caught up. Looks like he's not in the underworld. He's not looking down there. So my take on kind of piecing all of it together is that the saints, the redeemed, also went to Sheol. They also went down to the grave, but they went to a good part of the grave, a good part of that realm, while the wicked went to the bad part of that realm, awaiting final judgment. Jesus dies, he redeems all of his people, including those who died before he came. And he took all of the people in the good part of Sheol to heaven with him. And he will eventually, you know, redeem the whole earth, and all that stuff's going to happen in the future. But now that's why I think it's absolutely fine and proper and correct to speak of people going to heaven when they die. Because we don't go down, I mean, our body goes into a grave, but as far as our consciousness and where do we go, I think the redeemed are no longer in Sheol, and the New Testament seems to bear that out. In the New Testament, the redeemed are with Christ in heaven. You know, Paul talks about, you know, to die is Christ, you know, to die is gain, to die is more Christ is what that means. You know, to live is Christ, to die is gain. You know, I would rather depart and be with Christ. So we're going where Christ went. Christ went up, you know, he ascended. So that's what all of that comes back to. How is this a new and living way? Well, in the Old Testament, yes, the redeemed were redeemed and they were, you know, set apart to be saved, but they weren't brought out of the grave until Jesus died, is what I'm getting at. There was a new thing that happened. Yes, they were saved by faith, but no, the new covenant hadn't happened yet. So that's kind of one thing that points to it, and there's a lot of other things, but that's kind of one of the big things I wanted to touch on. So then moving on to verses 21 and 22, 21 says, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God. So notice, remember, it said, therefore, it says, therefore, since, you know, I'll go back, therefore, brothers, since we have confidence by the new and living way. And then, sorry, I got to skip through these again. And then, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God. So those are the therefore sinces. They're still talking about what the text has all talked about up to this point. 22 finally says, let us, okay, this is the application. Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. All right. So what's going on here? So it's this is another callback, of course, and since. So we're still talking about therefore, since the stuff I said before, let us do this. And since we have a great high priest, that's discussed in detail in chapter 7. Jesus' priesthood is, remember, Jesus' priesthood is not according to the law. So 7:28 talks about that. 8:4 talks about that. No indication in any Sinai command regarding the priest that the priesthood of Melchizedek has any connection. So remember, it says he's a priest. The promise in Psalm 110 is, you will be a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek is a figure from, who's called a priest of the Most High God. He's a figure from Genesis that Abraham interacted with. In Psalms, after the law, and this is how Hebrews characterizes it, is that yes, this happened before the law, so there's a prior priesthood of God on the earth before God gives the law and gives the Levitical priesthood. That priesthood is the one that Jesus is going to be connected to. And the promise that he would be connected to it comes after the law. So it makes it very clear in these verses that Jesus' priesthood is not according to the law. You know, it's explicitly denied. 7:28 talks about there are priests according to the law. That's not Jesus. He's not from that tribe. It's also made it clear that it was promised after. This is what I was referring to. And after the giving of the law. So the text makes it absolutely clear. Since we have this great high priest, this great high priest's priesthood has nothing to do with the law. It has nothing to do with the Sinai covenant. It is completely outside of that context. And that's something that is very important. There are some Torah observant folks that try to point out, just because Jesus is our high priest, they then go to the passages, in Leviticus to try to define what that means. But Hebrews is not letting us do that. We cannot define what Jesus' priesthood looks like based on what the Levitical priest looks like, because it's not at all the same priesthood. All right. So then he says, in verse 22, our first let us, it's a call to faith. To let us draw near with a true heart, based on our hearts and consciences being clean. Remember, that's been a theme throughout Hebrews, is that the law and the sacrifices, those things could not cleanse our conscience, but Jesus did, by his once for all sacrifice. Connected to that idea, we also have a reference here to baptism and the command to also be washed in our bodies to reflect what has become of our hearts. It says, notice it says, our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience. And what's being sprinkled, I would say, is the blood of Christ, spiritually speaking, sprinkles our hearts clean, and our bodies washed with pure water. I don't know any way to take that other than Christian baptism. Let us have faith and get baptized. Let us do these things. Pretty simple. All right. So then, let us hold fast the confession. Now we're moving to verse 23 and 24. Again, indicating, we're in application. We have another let us hold fast the confession. What's the confession? That's our faith. Do not waver in your faith. That's the constant drumbeat of Hebrews. We've seen it in many chapters, many warnings about falling away from the faith, many commands to hold fast to our confession. So that's going on here again as well. And the question is, in context, remember, we're still in chapter 10, which says tons. In the first half, if you go back to the last part of this series and look at the first half of chapter 10, it's all about the sacrifices and holding fast to Christ, not going back to those. And that's the question here. Are we going to hold fast to our confession of Christ, or are we going to go back and cling to those sacrifices? But now that we're holding fast to that, it says, let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good deeds. So we see again this corporate emphasis. This is, not written to, someone off by themselves, on our own. It's something that we do within the body, and this is huge, especially as it relates again to the Torah movements. Our theology is meant to cause us to come together as a body and get to work. We come together and we say, hey, what can we do? We love God. God's given us a mission in the world. What can we do? And what needs doing? Talk to your, go to your pastor, your elders, your fellow Christians in your church, and look at what they're doing, but also keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. That's one of the big reasons I'm excited to go to Kick, and I'm actually hoping I'm not the only one. I'm hoping that people will join me there. I'm hoping some of you will join me there, not just to be an audience, but to join in the work. Like I said, I have the ability to bring people on stream with me. I'm looking at some of you guys to come on with me, and we can discuss some of the issues, and doesn't have to just be me. I'm hoping that other apologists who are doing stuff on YouTube right now and doing these great live streams and stuff, I'm hoping they, open up shop over there on Kick as well, and that we can, just grow that work, and let's stir one another up. That's a wonderful thing to do. But it's a corporate thing. We don't just isolate ourselves and not not hear from one another. And that, unfortunately, that is a problem in the Torah movements for sure. It says, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So, again, this is a common passage you hear when it comes to people who say, oh, I don't need to go to church. You know, I can read the Bible on my own. And you know, there's a lot of people who've been hurt deeply by the church and by people in the church. Because, you know, the church is full of people and people sin. And, you know, it's not that doesn't happen in the church, sadly. But the command to us as regular people is to not neglect meeting together. Don't neglect the gathering, as is the habit of some. And this is a major problem in the Torah movements. People, you know, and many of the teachers there encourage people to be on their own walk or their own journey and seek to isolate those people from the churches they're a part of, so they can manipulate them and so that they can better indoctrinate them into what they want to teach. And it's sad, frankly. Really, in the Torah movements, there's not a lot when it comes to real evangelism. They're not going into the places where, you know, there are just irregular unbelievers. They think, oh, what we need to do is get the whole church to keep the Torah the way we think you should keep the Torah. And one way of doing that is to produce stuff online and get people to question their faith and tell people the whole time, oh, you know, you're on your own journey and your own walk. And are we all on our own journey? Well, I mean, in one sense, I mean, I'm the only one in my head, you know, other than if God wants to speak to me, but I haven't heard that. You know, there's no other people, you know, in my head, in my heart. There's a sense in which everything we do, we're all on our own, but the command is to be together with the people of God so that we don't fall away, frankly. And that warning's all throughout Hebrews. So that's a big one. That's a big one. You know, Hebrews, it's consistently talked this way about stirring one up another, check one another. You know, Hebrews 4, when it talks about rest, make sure with one another that they may have failed to enter the rest, you know. So that's been going on through the whole book. All right, verse 26, talking about if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment. This verse is often used. I've heard it used to manipulate people based on fear. I've heard it used by the guy that runs the channel Parable of the Vineyard, another sort of Hebrew roots type channel, to try to tell people, hey, you know, now that I've heard 119 Ministries talk this way as well, that, see, this verse says that once you've heard about Torah observance, you know, you have to do it, or else, you know, you're going to be condemned. And and that's what it kind of sounds like if you think that's the context of the verse. Of course, we know it isn't. What we know is that, you know, sinning, when it says go on sinning deliberately after receiving knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. That's pretty clear. You know, put it in the context of stirring up one another to love and good deeds. You know, we're supposed to be together and help each other to not sin and to do good things instead. So it's much harder to go on sinning deliberately if you're in deep community with other believers. I mean, you're going to immediately cut yourself off from that community if you go on sinning deliberately. And if you don't want to be cut off from that community, you won't. It's a big help, being around the people who will ask you and help you to move in the right direction. The primary sin, remember when it talks about sinning deliberately, what's the primary sin Hebrews is warning against? It's unbelief. It's apostasy. That's the main sin that it's talking about. And this verse is clearly more broad than that. It's just talking about sinning more generally, but the context is that idea of separating oneself from the people of God. And if you're doing that, that's very dangerous. I'm seeing in the chat there, random says some Christians try to make it seem you can lose your salvation, and we've talked about this. I mean, you'd have to go way back to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the main spot in Hebrews where it's really brought out this question of losing your salvation, and Hebrews has several warnings like this, that are used to support the idea of losing your salvation. I'm, being, broadly Reformed Calvinistic, I don't believe a person can lose their salvation, not truly, if they truly had it. Of course, these are things we can't see from the ground up. I think Hebrews does a good job of teaching us from both directions, teaching us there's from God's perspective and then there's from our perspective. From God's perspective, he sees the heart and he knows his people, and he will say, if he's going to save you, he's going to save you. You may slip, you may stumble in sin, you may stumble into egregious sin. But that doesn't mean you're going to be lost. If God has you, he's going to keep you. Jude says he's able to keep you from stumbling, and he will keep you, and he will, as Jesus talks about with the parable of the lost sheep, he will go and find that lost sheep and bring it back. So I think that from God's perspective, nobody who falls away was ever truly and fully redeemed. However, the Bible also, as Hebrews, I think, is teaches us, while it teaches us these lofty truths about God, it also brings us down to earth and says, okay, even knowing that, you have not been given God's knowledge about other people or even about yourself. So you have warnings, because people do fall away. From looking at it from the ground up, people fall away from the faith. People come into the church, they profess to believe, and then they leave and they reject God. And that happens in the real world, in this world we live in. And regardless of the fact that those other texts talk about God will, he will not lose any that are truly his. On the other hand, since we don't know who are truly his, from our perspective, we see it all the time. We see people come and go, and that is what is being warned against here. Don't, do not think you stand lest you fall. Do not think that you are, that you're invincible, because you are not. One of my favorite quotes about, losing your salvation, I think it's from, I don't remember who said it. It was either Vodi Bakum or John MacArthur. I don't remember which one, but I think it's Vodi, said, if you could lose your salvation, you would. It's just perfect way of putting it. If you could lose it, you would. And the fact is that people do come in, but if they don't truly have it, they go, they leave. And that's just, I think that's what's really being addressed here in Hebrews, is that we should not, there's a third doctrine, the other extreme. There's the idea that you can lose it, but then there's the idea that you can't lose it, no matter what you do. And this exists in some, and this is absolutely false. And that's the idea that if you at any point in your life professed faith in Christ and became saved, you can never lose it, even if you do apostatize and you do reject Christ, then you're still fine because you believed back then and you can't lose your salvation. And that's poppycock. And that's Hebrews is full of these warnings to say, do not think that you can do that. Do not think that, oh yeah, you can just, you believed one time and you're good. And even if you reject Christ, you're still good. No, you're not. You're proving your lack of true faith. And what you need to do is, repent and believe in Jesus. So, all right, let's continue on here. Coming now to verse 28, anyone who set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy. That's on the thumbnail there for this video. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. This is often used, as we're going to see when we look at Hegg's commentary, to talk about, oh, see, the law of Moses. I've been in conversation. I was in actually a Discord chat with some folks that were in this movement, and we were talking about this verse, and they said, see, this says the law of Moses is applicable because people die. And I say, yes, I mean, when this book was written, people died. People were, the death penalty was a real thing for people who broke the law of Moses. But look at the whole passage. This is just like a lot of the rest of the book. It goes, how much worse punishment will be deserved by the one who's trampled underfoot the Son of God. So this is a contrast of lesser to greater. Yes, the law of Moses was bad. Look how much worse it would be in the new covenant if you break that. The lesser is the law of Moses, the greater is the Son of God. And you notice that it's, if you just set aside the law of Moses, you die without mercy. But look what happens with the Son of God is you trample him underfoot. Breaking the law of Moses intentionally, that just meant execution in this life. That just meant, taking your physical life. But that's not the end of the line for you. Profaning the blood of the covenant, trampling underfoot the Son of God, that's much worse than death. That is the second death. That's the eternal damnation. So not so good. To outrage the Spirit of grace is to bring ultimate condemnation. Just breaking the law of Moses didn't do that, but because it wasn't as serious as this. Verse 28, it's a favorite. As I mentioned, they will ignore the whole thing, but it's a favorite of those who want to establish the punishments of the law of Moses being enforceable. One problem with this, as we see, it wasn't generally the case, frankly, even when it was written in the time when Hebrews was written before the fall of Jerusalem, even though, the Jews, they stoned Stephen and they tried to stone Jesus, but when it came to someone publicly in ministry, they couldn't crucify Jesus. They couldn't really, they had to go to the Romans. So even then, like what's often going on, the author of Hebrews here, when he says, anyone who set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy, he's speaking in the terms of the Torah. Like, we saw this in the earlier parts of the book where he uses the term tabernacle instead of temple. Because he's not speaking in terms of what's going on right now necessarily. He does speak that way, and I think he is referring to that in a general sense. When he talks about the priests stand in the temple and do their work, he is talking about them doing that work. But the context of what is going on is what's actually written in the Torah, not necessarily the ins and outs of the current political situation. So I think that's mainly what's going on, is that, even in this day, the idea that anyone who broke the law of Moses, you know, in such a way that they couldn't, you know, get a sacrifice for it, they're executed. Yes, because that's what the Torah says. That's what he's talking about. But that is so much less than, of course, trampling underfoot the Son of God. So Hebrews, again, this is just another example, and I've said this before, but I want to reiterate. Every single time the law of Moses is talked about, or when it shortens it, like when it says the law, with the definite article, the singular, the law, when it's referring to the law of Moses, it is always to point out the difference between the law and Jesus, and something about the law and the new covenant, the new, you know, what Jesus has done, all of that. So that's always going on throughout the whole book. Verse 30, we know of him who said, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And again, the Lord will judge his people. It's a fearful thing to fall in the hands of the living God. Again, just to bolster the point that rejecting the Son is much worse than breaking the law of Moses. Now, I'm not going to get in too much detail here, so the rest of the chapter kind of just continues to talk about this. You know, you've been through all these hard things. You were treated badly, and he's calling on the people to remember what they've suffered for their faith and to make sure that it's not in vain. When they trusted Christ, you know, they succeeded. It was not their own adherence to a Levitical system or something like that. It was their trust in Christ. So that's huge. And then he says, but we are not of those who shrink back. This is similar. I may have written this. Unlike those who give in to the pressure, remember those who shrink back, we are not like those who shrink back. And this is very similar to what was said in chapter 6, which is the one that's often talked about as being, you know, you can lose your salvation. He says, you know, but I know greater things for you. You're not one of these people that turns back. And he says the same thing here. We are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. As always, you know, Hebrews gives our context, and it's always about where your faith is. If you have faith in Jesus, you're not like those who put their faith in the old sacrifices that are becoming obsolete with the end of the old covenant. All right. I'm going to go to, I see, it looks like my camera is doing a thing. You can hear me. Hang on a second. Oh, I see. So just so you know, I'll know, my camera is my phone. And my phone has been plugged in this whole time, but it was insufficient. The charging was insufficient to keep my phone charged for the whole stream. So bear with me a moment. I'm going to get it plugged in a new spot, and this will hopefully solve that. Just one moment. Talk amongst yourselves. I've seen the emails. You, or more likely a loved one, has become enamored with rediscovering the Hebraic roots of the Christian faith. The importance of the Torah is being hidden in the churches, and one self-proclaimed teacher or another is just making so much sense, and your head is spinning and you're looking for answers. This is the place to find them. Since I was made aware of the Torah movements, I've been working to understand them, listen to... Okay, here we go. I'm back. All right. Hopefully it didn't, everything didn't fall apart. All right. So, you can hear me. Okay. And you can see me. Hopefully the phone doesn't die again. It's plugged into a new place, and hopefully that's good enough. All right. Get back to where we were with the slides. Okay. Answering Tim Hegg's commentary. All right. Here we go. So we've been through the passage. Let's go ahead and keep going and talk about Tim Hegg. And if you don't know who that is, if it's your first time here, then Tim Hegg is the head of Torah Resource, which is a Torah observant organization that teaches various things about the Torah. Tim is a real scholar. He knows the biblical languages, and he's read just a ton. And he's created a Hebrews commentary, and he created this commentary in order to make the case that the book of Hebrews, taken on its own terms, affirms his theology, not normal Christian theology that rejects Torah observance, and says that things have changed, new covenant, all of that. So we've gone through. Really, we haven't looked at his commentary the entire time I've looked at Hebrews. Really started doing it in chapter 8 when we were talking about the new covenant. But be that as it may, that's who Tim Hegg is, and we're gonna interact with what he says about the verses we just looked at. Let's start doing that. Because the section is now moving on to application, there's not as much in his commentary that we'll have to really object to. But, there are some things. So got this section from his commentary. So this is Tim Hegg. By a new and living way, in describing this way to enter the holy place as new, our author is not suggesting that a new way or method of salvation. Hey, thank you. I didn't see who it was who's now following. Thank you so much. Let me make sure that looks like it was not on top of everything like I want it. Here we go. Hey, that little sound, if you weren't here at the beginning, that's someone following on Kick, even though I'm not actually streaming there at the moment. All right. Back to it. So he's talking about this phrase, new and living way, that we talked about at the beginning. And he says, so in describing this way to enter the holy place as new, our author is not suggesting that a new way or method of salvation has now come into place following the death, resurrection, and ascension of Yeshua, which is Jesus. Rather, it is new because the heavenly high priest is after the order of Melchizedek rather than being from the line of Aaron through Levi, and that he offered himself as a sacrifice, as the next phrase in the verse explains, interceding for his people in the heavenly rather than the earthly tabernacle. So he's saying it's not new in terms of the salvation. It's not actually a new way. It's a new way because it's a different priesthood. So we're going to kind of interact with that. So he's not incorrect here. Salvation's always been through faith. And there's some things that I put in here I think might be wrong. He doesn't really tell us what that new and living way is. I mean, yes, it's through a new priesthood, but that's I mean, what you read there is really what he gives us. He doesn't explain why, just because it's the Melchizedek priesthood, that doesn't mean much. I mean, really, the Melchizedek priesthood is older than the Levitical priesthood. But the whole section reads this way. There's nothing, I'm not skipping over something, he said, that explains how it is that the new, that this is new and different from Sinai. Yes, as we talked about, the promise to Christ that he would be a priest after the order of Melchizedek, it does talk about that coming after the law, but that's a long time ago. Is it just that Jesus becomes this priest? Again, Hegg is very much on one when it comes to, it's always about the two priesthoods. Everything he thinks, he tries to make everything about the two priesthoods in order to keep it from being about two covenants a lot. But really, how is it a new way just because it's a different priesthood? What it is actually is a new sacrifice, but he doesn't really talk about that. He likes to talk a lot about his own theology and doesn't really get into what the text said. The text literally says that a way to God through the flesh of Christ sacrificed for us is the new and living way. That's what the text says. He doesn't really talk about the flesh of Christ at all. He just, it's a different priesthood, so it's new and living way. Again, that just doesn't give us much. The newness of the coming Christ when he did is really lost in Hegg's mission to make sure nothing is really new or allowed to change. Everything must be old. And you hear that when he talks about the new covenant, he talks about how it's not really new because Abraham was saved by faith and things like that. So it's a very common thing in the Torah movements, and he's big on that, just trying to show, this new thing isn't really new. So that's kind of a thing. He makes this statement of salvation. It really makes his treatment of salvation very shallow. It's only talking about the means, the application, but not really talking about the death of Christ, which is what Hebrews is all about. That once for all sacrifice of Christ. It's overall, it's all over the place. But again, we don't have to guess what's new. The death of Christ, which inaugurated the new covenant by which we're saved, that's what's new. The Old Testament saints had the same method. They apprehended it by faith, but again, it was the death of Christ that took it away, and we spent good time on that. So, moving to another section, he talks about the noun. So this is again quoting from Hegg's commentary. The noun korban, that which is dedicated to be sacrificed, is likewise derived from this verb to draw near. So he's talking about us drawing near to Christ, drawing near by Jesus. Thus, to draw near means to bring a sacrifice of prayer, praise, and worship, even as our author notes in 13:15. So again, at the end of Hebrews talks about that sacrifice of praise, right? Going on with what Hegg says, through him then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of lips that give thanks to his name. We are enabled to bring our sacrifices, placed as it were in the hands of Yeshua, our high priest, before the very throne of God. And in so doing, we must have a true heart, some Greek there, which from his Hebraic standpoint has to do with true or genuine motives. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. So Hegg, he's talking about that phrase, let us draw near, in verse 22. Korban, of course, does not appear here, but that's not his claim. He's saying that the term derives from the same verb to draw near. The question I would pose is why? Why is he bringing up korban here? He's spilled so much, after spilling so much ink about how covenant isn't in Hebrews 8:7, despite the text clearly being about the new covenant. And you kind of have to go back to a number of episodes to where we talked about chapter 8. But in 8:7, it's the one that talks about, if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no cause to seek for a second, for a new covenant. Well, that phrase, the first covenant, the word covenant, isn't in that verse. So when it says, if that first had been faultless, there would have been no cause sought for a second. Well, he spent all kinds of time. When I say spilling ink, I mean, he spent tons and tons and tons of time, and we addressed it all in very much detail. Talking about how, see, the word covenant isn't here, so it's not really about covenants, it's about priesthoods. But then we get to here, and it says, let us draw near, and he's like, let's talk about the word korban, which korban you may recognize. It's something Jesus talks about. It's a word that he uses when he's talking about the traditions of men, and he says, the people won't give won't support their parents, their elderly parents. They give it to the temple, and they call it korban, which is devoted to God. And he's saying that korban is derived from the same word. But again, why is, he spent so much time talking about how the word covenant isn't in the other text, but now he wants to insert korban here. It's also curious, that he cites Hebrews 13:15, talking about the sacrifice of praise. Now, he may be, one has to guess. I mean, sometimes and this is kind of true with a lot of scholars, sometimes you have to guess. I mean, they're just like going off and making connections, and they may not really be a strong conclusion being drawn. He does this a lot, where he's just like saying stuff he knows about this passage and about the Greek or the Hebrew, and it's just really to just talk about some of the background and details. And hey, those are sometimes really good, but why is he coming up with sacrifice of praise? The irony, I mean, he may be talking about, I think it seems what he's doing is trying to, draw a connection somewhere with the animal sacrifices, because he thinks those continue. So he may be trying to say, well, let us draw near it's kind of like, when they drew near with the animal sacrifices. But of course, the irony is that in the actual text, the people, never draw near with animal sacrifices in Hebrews. We draw near with the sacrifice of praise. It never uses we or us with regard to those sacrifices at all. It talks about those priests offer the sacrifices, but it never says we do. All right, moving on. His commentary, starting there and see verse 28. It says, anyone who set aside the Torah of Moses dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. We talked a bit about this text. He goes on to say, here our author is setting up a kal v'chomer argument from the lesser to the greater. And the fulcrum that gives leverage to the argument is the eternal viability of the Torah. He chooses an example which he is certain no one will dispute, namely the inevitable applicability of the Torah of Moses. Far from viewing the Torah as inoperative or abolished, our author appeals to its eternal validity as justification for his conclusion. All right, let's talk a little bit about this claim. I'll start off by noticing he says Torah of Moses, not law of Moses. This is in his commentary. He's saying Torah. And this is a common practice for English-speaking Torah teachers to translate Greek into Hebrew instead of English. We want to see Torah as many times in the text as we can. The word Torah is not there, it's Greek. It's the word nomos, not Torah. And rather than translating into English as law, he back translates it or translates it into a third language to say Torah. This is just a comment on this practice in general, but I think this is mostly just confusing for people. The context context and they do this a lot. Any text that says the word law, they'll insert Torah, and it messes with the text because the word law doesn't always refer to the same thing in the context, and it doesn't always refer to the Torah in the sense of it being a body of commandments given to Moses. Torah can mean a number of things. The Torah can mean a number of things, but law in the New Testament really can mean a number of things that aren't always that body of commandments given to Moses. But when you make it a term that people don't generally use, you turn it into a technical term that always means the same thing. And so it's mostly confusing because it causes people to take these passages out of their context. I'm just since I'm waxing, I'm just looking in the chat here. I see Random T Chance says, ask him how many times God from a mountaintop has told people how to live. Yeah, I mean, it's happened more than once. Happened in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus did that for the new covenant, for what he would establish in the new covenant in the Sermon on the Mount. So there's law. People think, oh, new covenant, we don't have law. That's not true. We have law. It says it right there in Hebrews 8, quoting the Old Testament, he will write his law in our hearts. But it's not this Torah given to Moses that's written on our hearts. But it is the eternal law of God that has been around since before the law of Moses, that he writes on our hearts. And so, yes, we have law. We don't achieve salvation through it, but we have it. And that's something that it's missed a lot, and I think a lot of Christians miss it too. A lot of Christians don't understand our relationship to God's law properly, and so they think, "Oh yeah, there's no law. We're new covenant now. We don't have law." And no, that's wrong. We do have law, and it gives fuel to those in the Torah movements who incorrectly, and I think sometimes maliciously incorrectly, say that we believe that the law is done away with or is, no longer applies to us in any way at all. That's just a straw man. I mean, historic Christianity has not believed that. But that's a tangent. I don't want to get too far on that tangent. The point is, saying Torah instead of law invites us to turn it into a technical term referring only to the commandments given to Moses rather than... Now, in this passage, I think it is. Truthfully, if any passage you back translate it into Torah and it doesn't screw things up, it doesn't screw things up here, but I did want to take this opportunity to kind of discuss that a little bit. There's no English translation that puts Torah here, except the ones that purposefully, for these groups, translate Greek into Hebrew instead of English. Anyway, let's move on. But he is correct here. He uses some word I didn't understand there, but it is a lesser to greater argument. Breaking the law of Moses carries the death penalty. How much worse defying the Son of God? Of course, I noticed 3 times that Hegg used a phrase equivalent to this eternal applicability in order to make it work. It says that the passage depends on the eternal applicability of the Torah. That claim, of course, is provably false. Hebrews has been making this same kind of argument the entire book. The lesser to greater argument has nothing to do with that. And in fact, Hegg, I don't think this was in my notes, but in chapter 8, when Hegg is like, it's all about priesthoods, not covenants. It's not that it's an old covenant that's passed away and a new covenant is here. It's all just about the priesthoods, and it's no longer, we're not operating under the Levitical, but under the priesthood of Christ. But he thinks we are still operating under the Levitical priesthood. He thinks the Levitical priesthood is going to continue again in the millennium, and they're going to do animal sacrifices again, and animal sacrifices coexist with Jesus' sacrifice. So everything the text says, if it's about the Levitical priesthood, then it's about something in the law that's passed away. And I made this argument when we were talking about that even if he's right, it still defeats his theology. But the point that I want to make here is, he's saying that this lesser to greater argument depends on the eternal applicability. Well, if that's true, then that would have to be true the whole time that these lesser to greater arguments are being made all throughout Hebrews. But that doesn't make any sense when we're talking about the priesthood, because it literally says, so chapter 8 is talking about the covenants. It is what it's actually talking about. And when it says in verse 13, in calling it new, he has declared the first to be old, and whatever's old is becoming obsolete and passing away. I think, it says in this language similar to that. The old covenant is becoming obsolete. Well, he can't get away from that language. He tries to get around it by saying it's not about a covenant, but about priesthoods. But it's still the same thing. It's saying that that priesthood has passed away. Well, if that priesthood has passed away, then eternal applicability is not necessary for there to be a lesser to greater argument, like is made. And the fact is, the lesser to greater argument regarding priesthoods is made. It's made in chapter 7, not chapter 8. But he thinks it goes on into chapter 8 because he doesn't want to deal with the new covenant. But my point is, even on his interpretation of the text, what he's saying here, what he repeated 3 times, I mean, we go back to his, let me get back to that and show you what I'm talking about. Notice what he said. So here our author is setting up an argument from lesser to greater. The fulcrum that gives leverage to the argument is the eternal viability, there's one, of the Torah. He chooses an example which he is certain no one will dispute, namely the inevitable applicability, that's 2, of the Torah of Moses. Far from viewing the Torah as inoperative or abolished, our author appeals to the eternal validity, that's 3, as justification for his. So he thinks that, he's trying to muster up that the author of Hebrews is appealing to the eternal validity of the Torah when he says a man who breaks the law of Moses dies without mercy, as if that's what's going on. But we, first of all, we've seen that doesn't fit with the rest of his arguments. Let me get back to the where we were in the notes. So he made the same argument regarding the priesthood, but the priesthood has changed. Hebrews 7:28 says, if there's a change in the priesthood, there's necessarily a change in the law also. The priesthood has changed. So it doesn't have to be eternally applicable in the same way in order for, the lesser to greater argument to work. It is unnecessary. It's an assumption. He's trying to get his conclusion by pretending that conclusion is necessary for the argument, but it just never is. The author of Hebrews never does that. The other issue, of course, is this is a straw man argument. He's taking a cheap shot by creating a false dichotomy between his Torah observance position and a position that holds a complete eradication of the entire law of Moses. This is what I went off on a little bit just a few minutes ago, that we do believe in the law of God, and that is the law of God is eternally applicable, but not every commandment given to Moses is part of that eternal law of God. That view exists. It's not the historic Christian position. His argument only works, all that eternal applicability stuff. It only works really if he's arguing someone that said the whole law is done away with, which Christians have not historically done. There are those today that talk that way. Holding that certain laws were tied to the Sinai covenant and are no longer binding in the same way is not the same as saying the whole law is done away with. These are two different things. But he keeps misrepresenting, because if you really acknowledge that, if you really argued against the historic Christian position on the law, most of his arguments would fail. They just wouldn't work. All right, moving on to his next quote. It is not uncommon to read Christian commentators who seek to interpret this verse as though our author were saying that in previous times, anyone who set aside the Torah of Moses dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, explaining that the abolition of the Torah by Yeshua's death, our author was simply using an argument which would appeal to the Jewish people of his day. But such a view entirely weakens our author's, whatever, Calva Komar or whatever, his lesser to greater argument. For if he honestly believed that Yeshua had abolished the Torah and it therefore had no current ability to condemn the sinner, then this how much more argument applied to denying Jesus, then this how much more argument applied to denying Yeshua entirely loses its force. So what he's saying there is this argument, again, it's kind of making the same point, but in a little more down-to-earth practical way. He's saying, look, when he says dies without mercy, you know, we could imagine him saying in previous times someone died without mercy, you know, based on the testimony. But it has to be present tense, because look at the present tense. It's people, they die without mercy now. You know, that has to be the case. Now, again, historically, we see that that isn't always the case. It wasn't the case with Jesus. They accused him of breaking the law, but they couldn't just put him to death. They had to go to the Romans. Things weren't as cut and dry. Again, the Torah is speaking in regards, or the Hebrews is speaking in regards to how the Torah would have it be, so to speak. Yes, I think the present tenses are real present tenses. And I think he's not right here that the argument wouldn't work if it was all past tense. But I think he's right that it's talking about a present reality because of when the book was written. But we're going to get into that a little bit. I just point out that Hegg's argument here is a straw man. Most serious Christians, including scholars and commentators, do not hold the belief that the whole law is just cast away. That's what we would need to believe for his argument to work. And notice, despite many other times he's citing numerous commentaries to show the beliefs of his opponents, he's not really citing one here. Because the serious people don't think, yeah, the whole law is eradicated. So it means he's arguing against non-existent opponents. Okay. We're going to get into a little bit here of dating. I think we'll see what my notes say. It would be much easier for Hegg to argue against bold, easily refuted claims that no one's making than to argue against the carefully reasoned arguments that Christians have actually made for 2,000 years. So again, why does he misrepresent? Why does he say, see, the law is not completely eradicated? Because that's an easier argument to make. It's if your opponent is making bolder claims that are harder to prove, it's easier for you to argue against those. If your opponent is making more, specific and nuanced claims that actually consider all the evidence, that's much harder to disprove. And so he's choosing to go with the easy claims that people aren't making. This is continuing on with what he said before, because we're going to get into some of the dating of Hebrews here. It says, now, while this may not be overly significant, again, he's talking about the present tense, what we read in the last quote, the present tense, he who breaks, who sets aside, present tense, the law of Moses, dies without mercy, present tense. He's talking about that. It says, while this may not be overly significant, since the present tense could be a so-called historical present, it would seem more likely that had our author believed the Torah was abolished by Yeshua at his death, he would have put the whole statement in a past tense. The present tense, however, could reinforce the ongoing viability of the Torah, something necessary for our author to establish his point. So that's number 4. It's got to be ongoing viability, in his definition of what that means, i.e., all the commandments have to be kept the same way that Israel kept them, even though he doesn't really believe that. Anyway, so what's this historical present thing? Well, I have some notes on that. There is a glaring, huge inconsistency here. So hold that in your brain, what he said. He said it might just be a historical present. What might be? Though he who sets aside the law of Moses dies without mercy. That's in the present tense. Maybe it's historical present. What's historical present? So Hegg has talked about this earlier in the commentary, but historical present is something in Greek, and we see it in English too, where someone is talking about the past, but they're using present tense language to do so. It's very common to see, we do it in English. So, especially if we're talking about something exciting, so, when you're trying to tell someone about something exciting that happened. Oh, I turn the corner, I look, and I see this guy barreling around another corner, and he's crashing into stuff around him. Like we may talk in a present tense, and in Greek that exists too, and it's in the Bible. There are quite a few times you see it in the Gospels. It's not always brought out in our translations. A lot of times our translations recognize it and just go ahead and put it in past tense to make it make sense. Some more that want to be more literal, but don't want to turn things too crazy. I had an NASB that it would now be called the NASB 1995. And I don't know if it was just that printing or if it was all of them. I don't know, but I had one, and it would put the way it handled historical presence, it wanted to alert you they were there, and it put a little star next to that verb. So if you read a verb that was in past tense in your English translation, but the Greek had it in present tense, it would put a little star right next to that word. So that's how I learned about historical present many, many, many years ago. They exist. Hegg believes and to give you a little background, Hegg believes that Hebrews was written after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. He believes that it was written, who knows, sometime later, shortly after, 90s, 80s, something like that. And he does so. I don't remember if I didn't really dig into this at this point in the series very much, so I'm going to kind of talk about it a little bit here. But he believes that because it makes his case easier to make with some other areas of Hebrews, but then he runs into problems, and he runs into a huge inconsistency right here. So let's kind of go through that. We've talked about this many times. He's unashamed to insert opinions as if they were established fact, but he has to acknowledge a potential conflict here. He claims Hebrews was written after the destruction of the temple. So all the present tense language that we've looked at regarding the priests, they go into the temple, they stand, they offer their offerings, all that's in the present tense. He says it's all historical present. It's not really, it's just talking about it it's past tense, but it's talking about present tense. But now here, when he wants to make an argument for the eternal viability, the eternal applicability of the Torah, now he claims we should not read the present tense about how a lawbreaker dies for breaking the law of Moses the same way he told us to read all the other stuff about the sacrifices. He told us all that stuff, it's historical present. It's about the past, but it's being spoken of in the present. But now in this verse, he really, really wants this verse to be about the present, and not only the present, but the eternal, unchanging applicability. That's why it's in present tense. So he really wants to hang a lot on this present tense, but he just made a bunch of argument about why Hebrews is full of this historical present, which I don't believe it ever is. I haven't done my research on everything that relates to this, but like, I'm pretty sure in the Bible, pretty much when I read through my Bible in that translation that had little stars, it's always in a narrative section where you find the historical present. It's in the Gospels. The two places I saw it was in the Gospels and in Revelation. And in both cases, we're being told about something that's happening right then for the people who are there right then. Obviously, it's written after the fact, and so most things are in the past tense, just like we tell, we were there when something happened, so we talk about it in the past tense, but we might slip into some present tense if things are exciting. Similarly, in the Gospels, it's mostly in the past tense about something that happened before the writing, but then it slips into present tense sometimes. Likewise in Revelation, John writes about the things that he sees and all of that. And I'm even doing it now, right? He writes about the things he sees. John saw these visions and wrote about them. And sometimes he slips into the present tense when he's talking about the visions. So yes, that happens, but I'd have to go do some research to be sure, but I'm pretty sure we don't see it in Paul, in his epistles. If he talks, mostly it's teaching doctrine and things. There's not really tenses needed, but a lot of times events are appealed to. Things about Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. There's things that happened in a narrative that are drawn upon and talked about in the course of teaching doctrine. And in Hebrews, the same is going on, but it's like all present tense. And we just don't have examples that I know of. And again, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, no scholars that I know of, maybe there's a tiny minority, but none that I'm aware of, teach that Hebrews is doing this at any point. This historical present that Hegg is trying to hang his hat on. But of course, when it doesn't, the major inconsistency, when it doesn't work for him, he abandons it. Here in this part of the book. So he acknowledges here that it could be another one. It is present tense, and he said those other ones were historical present. But does it give us any reason? No. He's just mind reading the author, and depending on his own conclusion that the present applicability of the law of Moses is necessary for the argument, when we've already shown it clearly isn't. So it's just complete special pleading. He just, well, in this case, it works for my argument for it not to be historical present, so I'm going to say it's not. Again, it's all nothing but from the beginning. Hegg's argument is nothing but his opinion built on the foundation of his opinion. That's what I see a lot in this translation, or in this commentary. But again, that's not the worst thing. So let's assume, he's right, and this may be something I've already said, but let's assume he's right about the date that Hebrews is written. Oh, yes. So remember, we're talking about the eternal applicability, as his claim, of the fact that people who set aside the law of Moses die without mercy. That's kind of, there's a reason I made that the title of this video. And it wasn't just that it's snazzy language. Let's assume he's right. That Hebrews was written after AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. That would mean that all of the present tense references to the work of the priests, they're not really present tense. They're historical present, as he's claiming. And they should be understood as past tense. But according to Hegg, this statement about the law that is present tense should be taken as actually present. So we've talked about all that. But here's this inconsistency operates on another level. We've already talked about how it's just crazy special pleading, and we'll talk about that. And that's, on a simple level, it's just a clear case of him letting his theological bias tell us what the text should say. But there's more. On a more contextual level, consider what he's actually arguing in light of the situation before and after the destruction of Jerusalem. Hegg is actually insisting that while the priesthood was not functioning after AD 70, the execution of breakers of the law of Moses was still functioning. Think about that. He's saying all that's historical present. The temple's destroyed. This is written after AD 70. The temple's destroyed. All that stuff is historical present. It's actually just about the past. It's not really operating now. But executing lawbreakers under the law of Moses, that's still operating. That's what's in view. That's what we're looking at. And we see in the Gospels, Jesus, he can't be put to death without the permission of the Romans, and that's with a fully functional Israel. And still, they have to jump through extra hoops. It's not that just setting aside the law of Moses gets you put to death. The Jews have to actually do other stuff. But he wants us to believe that the law of Moses brings the death penalty when the Jews are scattered and homeless. When the Jews no longer in Jerusalem, they've been completely scattered, they're homeless, they're dispersed, they have no power, but they can still bring about the death penalty for those who break the law. He wants you to believe that the eternal applicability of the law is being expressed by the present tense with the death penalty, while believing that this was written when there's no nation of Israel left at all. He asks you to believe this while simultaneously asking you to ignore the repeated present tense description of the work of the priesthood as mere historical present. If you have his commentary, I challenge you to find where he presents any evidence at all from the text itself for any of this. Face it, Hegg's interpretations are driven by a settled theology, and that's backwards. His theology drives his interpretation of the text. The text does not drive his theology. And I didn't, like I said, if you go back through my stuff, you won't really find me before now really spending a lot of time with this historical present stuff and his belief in the later dating. I think that it's because he doesn't, I have to guess at this, he doesn't really give, like I said, evidence from the text. When he talks about, it could be dated later, and he says, and his entire argument really comes down to, it could be dated later because historical present's a thing. But he doesn't give us any evidence from the text why it should be dated later. There's some stuff, and I don't have time to get into it all. There's some stuff where if you were to date it later, it kind of helps his theology. It kind of helps get out of some of the hard spots for his theology. But of course, that's not from the text. That's from his theology. So, but if you compare his view to the vast majority of scholars, they say it was written before AD 70. The priesthood work was still operational. So the present tense is just present tense. Also means the death penalty was still operational, even though it was, under the imposing authority of Rome. It was not freely done, but it was operational. Which view asks you to jump fewer hurdles to make the text make sense? Obviously, his does not. And again, does he actually argue for his view? As always, no. He just asserts it. and moves along. Hebrews 10:28 and 29 clearly does make an argument that rejecting Jesus is worse than the death penalty of the law of Moses. You don't have to think the death penalty is eternally binding on all people to get there. You can just look at the text and say, yeah, that's what the law of Moses says, and rejecting Jesus is worse than that. He never explains why you have to have an eternally applicable law. He just keeps asserting it over and over, because the text doesn't explain why that would have to be the case. The rest of his comments on chapter 10 aren't really worth digging into, as they don't really pertain to his apologetic for Torah observance. He just kind of gives a commentary on what he sees in the text, but it doesn't really have to do with that. So, what are our conclusions? This is an application section following the final nail in the coffin for the troublers of the saints in verse 18, where there's forgiveness of these, there's no longer any offering for sin. The call is to remain faithful in Christ. The call is to not isolate yourself from the true followers of Christ, to go back to the law of Moses' sacrificial system. Do not forsake the gathering. The gathering of believers is set against the sacrifices of the temple. That contrast made, Hebrews then argues that it is a far graver sin to forsake Christ than to break the law of Moses, though it did bring death. As usual, Tim Hegg's commentary offers nothing but speculation and consistently fails to show how the text leads to his conclusion. He's reduced to making assertions about how the text could be made consistent with his worldview, engaging in all manner of special pleading to do so. Also, while I have read it through to the end, since the remaining chapters of Hebrews don't present too many major challenges to Hegg's theology, I didn't find anything of note so far. So going forward, I may not have a responding to Tim Hegg going through into chapter 11, 12, and 13. We'll see. I may look through it again, but there wasn't as much that popped out to me there. Perhaps we'll find something, but we'll see. All right. Questions? Any questions? I know it's been going for a couple hours, really, since we sat, about an hour and a half since we dove into Hebrews. Y'all have had some good comments and thoughts up to this point, so I don't know if anyone has any questions. I don't even really know how many people are here. All right. So if anyone has any questions, and it can be about anything, it can be about the section of Hebrews or any other section of Hebrews or Torah observance or anything you like, frankly. The big announcement stuff, if you want, that would be fine too. Let me go ahead and bring that back and get rid of this guy. All right. There we go. And let me grab your chat stuff. Random, yes. Giving you a lot to digest. I know it is a lot to digest. Mostly, a lot of it, frankly, especially talking about Tim Hegg's commentary, is just doing the heavy lifting of reading through the details and stuff just to show that it's not really something that you really need to digest. But as far as the text, yeah, I mean, it's good. It's so powerful. At this point, because we're in that section on starting to get into application, it's a little more about the, there's a lot of reiteration, maybe different thoughts, but a lot of stuff that's been gone over at this point. Next time we're, get into the Hall of Fame of Faith, and that's some pretty cool stuff too. Right. So I'm looking, not seeing anybody really have any questions, so that's totally fine. I notice I get a lot of comments on videos after the fact from the Torah folks, but they don't often speak up in the chat. I'm hoping that changes going over to Kick, that I get more pushback and have some good interactions, but we'll see how that goes. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just, go ahead and finish things up here and close down the YouTube stream and try to reconfigure my stuff and maybe get Kick going and try to do what I can there. My goal, like I said, is 3 to 4 hours. I'm already, based on when I said I would start, I'm already 2.5 hours into my my allotted time for the evening. But I'd like to get Kick working right. So if you want to join me over there, again, that's the address, kick.com/beginningwisdom. Come follow me there, and if you can stick with me tonight, awesome. If not, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you the next time. My plan is to be back here and also there on Kick on Thursday at 8 o'clock Central, and we can, talk about whatever. I won't have this heavy of a thing prepared, probably. Maybe, we'll see. Maybe I get chapter 11 all set up by then, but I doubt it. I'll try to give myself a week to do that. But anyway, I hope this has been a blessing for you, and I am looking forward to seeing you at the next one. So y'all have a wonderful evening, and God bless.